Hello, and welcome to this interview with the Ambassador McGann at the Riga Conference 2022. I am Ines Sevojka, member of the Parliament of Latvia, and today we want to discuss here women, peace, and security issues and how Ambassador McGann sees the issues and what is the importance of discussing it. And now seeing us on the stage, maybe our viewers have this view. Yes, women, peace and security is an important topic. And isn't that we should have more women debating the issue, having a say on this issue and having expressed views. We have a lot of security issues in the region here. Ukraine is at war. We see role of women. In Latvia, because of the war and the threat, we are debating our security. We are debating role of women in the security in the military forces, and women have a lot to say. So, who should be debating women, peace, and security, Mr. Ambassador?
Well, let me begin by first saying thank you for inviting me to the conference. When I was first apprised of the fact that I would be coming to Riga, the United States State Department specifically said that we want a man to come and discuss male roles in implementing women, peace, and security. And fortunately, I've had over the course of my career the ability and opportunity to engage in these issues. I think it's really important for men to be participants in the discussion on women, peace, and security. It's important because the conversation about implementing women, peace, and security is going to require a dialogue between men and women. But what's really important is that men have to understand women, peace, and security in different terms. And I think that's important that when we talk about WPS issues to men, we talk about them in concrete terms. For example, men would understand that the importance of including in military cooperation, security assistance, and law enforcement cooperation, the importance of including training to prevent gender-based violence. I think men would understand the importance of having healthcare infrastructure as an important part of our support for refugee and migrant populations, particularly in issues that are important to women, such as sexual health and reproduction, and also providing psychological counseling for women refugees, so to prevent them, for instance, in being susceptible to exploitation by criminal networks. I think men would also understand the importance of the fact that women are disproportionately in conflict situations, are also responsible for taking care of other members of the population who have special needs and disabilities, and their need for targeted resources. And finally, I think we can't overlook the fact that men still dominate the legislatures and parliaments of most countries, and it's important for men to understand that the key issues surrounding women, peace, and security, such as I mentioned earlier, have to be mandated by law, and that's regardless of whether or not you're a donor country or a donor recipient country, that men have an important role to play in understanding that addressing women, peace, and security issues in a concrete ways leads to successful outcomes. And that's really what the discussion is about, how to come to a common agreement on what does a successful outcome look like.
Thank you. You have had a long experience with this issue from the early days when the UN just started to grapple with understanding of the role of women in all of what UN is doing, but especially in the security area. So how do you see the progress in this thinking and the approach and the way things are discussed and also acted upon today compared to when you were writing your first speeches for as a junior diplomat?
Right. Well, first of all, it'd be unfair of me to suggest that when I joined the diplomatic corps that this was going to be the center piece of my career. I think that there's always this combination of self-authorship and serendipity. And over the course of the years, from my early work on the UN Commission on the Status of Women, in which we were really focused on implementing the forward-leaning strategies that emerged from the 1985 Conference on Women that was in Nairobi, to the UN resolution that was sponsored by the United States and co-sponsored by many countries to increase the number of women in senior level positions at the UN, all the way through to when I was director of the Office of Population, Refugees, and Migration in the State Department, dealing with vulnerable populations. This has been an evolutionary process for me. However, at the same time, it's not that it hasn't been a difficult process. When I served as the deputy commandant of one of our senior service schools at National Defense University in Washington, D.C., I was deputy commandant of the Eisenhower School there. The United States was beginning to grapple with how would the U.S. military implement women, peace, and security. How would the U.S. military see United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325 as a core element of determining successful mission objectives? It took a while to overcome that, to overcome the notion that when you're talking about women, peace, and security, you're not talking about women's prerogatives, preferences, or promotion, but you're really talking about is how do you implement policies and programs through a gender lens, understanding the needs and requirements of women and how that fits into the overall success of the mission. I would like to think that the United States military actually has been very forward-leaning, again, in understanding the importance of that. But it now has to spread beyond the military. It has to be a core part of the work of our civilian agencies as well. And I think in the United States, we're moving in that direction.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you a question of what you think about this. So women, when we see the role of women in the conflict, very often it is seen as a role of post-conflict. We also have seen many countries where women have been rebuilding the trust in torn-apart areas or mediating some of the war situations, be it in Syria or earlier in Rwanda and other places where tragic events, wars have happened. But then with, conflicts of today, like Colombia and other places, we also see that women are part of every step, including the fight itself. Mm-hmm. Is it true that, the gender lens and the way we deal with this, including, what do we do with the fighters, like in Colombia, when they put down their arms, and mm-hmm. many of them are women, and how do we treat them? So that the issue on women and security goes, it's not only about certain roles of women, but it's all across the board.
I think what we're really focusing on is the fact that you have to deal with women's issues and their participation through equality and equity. All right, that women have key roles to play, and mind you, those roles are leadership roles in pre-conflict, conflict, and post-conflict interventions. And so, what I'm suggesting is that we can't just see or place in silos the role of women and the leadership that women can bring to a situation. I do think that's important for women to be at the negotiating table. All right, because without women at the negotiating table, you won't be able to achieve the outcomes that you want. But at the same time, it's important for men to understand that it's not just achieving those outcomes, but making sure those outcomes are sustainable. All right? Because if they're sustainable outcomes, in fact, what you're going to do is eliminate the conditions that probably led to the conflict in the first place.
Sustainable outcomes for everyone, including women. Mm-hmm. And so for peace, what kind of sustainable outcomes do you mean in building the peace? What are the elements of it?
Well, I think obviously when we talk about sustainable outcomes, we have to look at what were the elements that brought together the conflict in the first place. And in very many cases, how women are treated in society are also very key instability indicators. For example, I mentioned earlier gender-based violence. Without addressing gender-based violence, you're going to have a situation in which women's roles in society are suppressed, women are discriminated against, and that this is not just something that's particular to any one region. We see it in the Pacific. We see it here in Eastern Europe, that the level of exploitation and vulnerability that is prevalent in the society against women is a key indicator of instability in that society. So I think that what we have to do is think about these issues such as income inequality. We have to think of equity in terms of elected officials. I think we have to think in terms of parity in responsibilities. And so when we start looking at these concepts, we then begin to actually build a framework in which we can address what we're calling sustainable outcomes that hopefully presuppose and perhaps even predict the fact that conflict would not arise.
Thank you. And my last question will also be somewhat provocative. At the UN level, where women, peace and security are discussed every year, actually also this week in October, it was discussed in New York. Very often people say, in the future there will be equality and equity and we won't talk so much about men and women separately. Now there is this role and task. Yet the new government of Sweden, who was known to have one of these policies, feminist foreign policies, have now abandoned it. This news, whatever that means, reached the world. You know, what is happening? Have we reached the stage where we don't need feminist policies anymore and can talk about the equality in a broader spectrum, or should we continue because the women don't have enough seat at the table and don't have enough say? Your final words on this introduction to the topic we are covering here.
Well, I don't think we've reached a stage in which we can stop a discussion of the need for feminist foreign policy. I will say that it's very difficult as a man to say I'm a representative of feminist foreign policy. But I can say I think it's very important for us to look at ways in which we can begin what I'm calling the harmonization of ideas and approaches toward how we deal with issues. So, for example, you mentioned the UN. I think it's important for all of us to understand that when we talk about the implementation of United Nations Sustainable Development Goals at home and abroad, what we're really talking about at its very core is including those issues that we're calling women, peace, and security issues, not as an add-on, but as an integral part of this framework going forward. So it's not so much that and I'm not really going to comment on what the government of Sweden does. I'm not here to represent Sweden, nor, by the way, am I here to represent the United States, although I do have strong opinions about what the United States is doing. I do think it's important for us to really think in terms of how we operationalize the implementation of women, peace, and security, that it shouldn't be seen as an add-on, but it really is a core part of activities. And once we begin this harmonization of thinking, that we're going to achieve the goals that we want to achieve.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, it was the Ambassador McGann from the United States, and I was Ines Savoyka, member of the Parliament of Latvia, and we were discussing women, peace, and security in today's world. Thank you.